Bully mocked veteran in a diner, not knowing an ex-convict would step in. Look at this pathetic excuse for a soldier. The words sliced through Riverside Diner like a knife. Tyler Grant, 28, stood over the elderly man's table, his designer sneakers inches from a fallen cane. The veteran's coffee had already hit the floor, brown liquid spreading across worn linoleum. Marcus Webb was 74 years old. His hands trembled as he reached for the cane Tyler had deliberately kicked away. The purple heart pin on his jacket caught the fluorescent lights, a small piece of metal representing sacrifices Tyler couldn't begin to comprehend. "Please, son," Marcus said quietly. "I don't want trouble." Tyler laughed, loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "Son? Don't call me that, old man. My father actually amounted to something." The breakfast crowd went silent. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye turned toward the confrontation, but nobody moved. Nobody intervened. This was Tyler Grant, son of the city's wealthiest real estate developer, untouchable, bulletproof. Sarah Chun, the waitress, gripped her order pad so tight her knuckles turned white. She'd seen Tyler humiliate people before. Last month, it was a homeless woman. 2 weeks ago, a delivery driver who'd parked in his spot. Each time, nobody stopped him. Each time, he walked away laughing. But today was different. In the corner booth, a man wearing a faded leather jacket looked up from his coffee. Jake Morrison was 42, recently released after 12 years in prison. He'd come to Riverside Diner for peace, for normalcy, for a quiet breakfast that didn't involve metal trays and prison guards. What he found instead was a bully tormenting a veteran. Jake's jaw tightened. His left hand, marked with scars from fights he'd rather forget, slowly set down his coffee cup. Everything in his post-prison counseling screamed at him to stay out of it. Don't get involved. Keep your head down. One wrong move sends you straight back inside. But Jake had made a promise to himself in prison. Never again would he stand by while the strong preyed on the weak. Tyler grabbed Marcus by the collar, yanking the elderly veteran halfway out of his seat. "Maybe you should find a different diner, Grandpa. Somewhere more appropriate for people like you." Marcus's eyes met Jake's across the diner. In that brief moment, two men who'd never spoken shared an understanding. Both knew what it meant to be powerless. Both knew what it felt like when nobody stepped forward. Jake stood up slowly. Tyler didn't notice. He was too busy performing for his audience, too drunk on power and privilege to see danger approaching from behind. "You know what your problem is," Tyler continued, his face inches from Marcus's. "You think that little pin gives you respect. Newsflash, nobody cares about ancient history." That's when Jake's hand landed on Tyler's shoulder. "I think you dropped something," Jake said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made several customers look up with sudden interest. Tyler spun around, ready to unleash his usual verbal assault. But something in Jake's eyes made him pause. This wasn't another scared customer. This wasn't someone who'd backed down from daddy's money and legal threats. This was someone who'd seen real darkness and survived it. "Who the hell are you?" Tyler demanded, his confidence wavering slightly. Jake didn't answer. He simply picked up Marcus's cane from the floor and handed it to the elderly veteran with surprising gentleness. "You okay, sir?" Marcus nodded, his dignity returning as he accepted the cane. "Thank you, young man." Tyler's face flushed red. Being ignored was worse than being challenged. "Do you know who I am? My father owns half this city. One phone call and I can make your life very difficult." Jake finally looked at Tyler directly. "Son, I just spent 12 years in maximum security. Your daddy's lawyers don't scare me." The temperature in the diner dropped several degrees. Sarah Chen's phone was already out, recording. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. Tyler's family had buried previous complaints because nobody had proof. Not this time. What nobody in that diner knew was that Marcus Webb wasn't just any veteran. He was a decorated hero who'd saved 23 soldiers during an ambush in Vietnam. And what Tyler definitely didn't know was that Jake Morrison had spent the last 12 years becoming something far more dangerous than the scared kid who'd entered prison. He'd become someone who understood exactly how to use the system against bullies like Tyler. The confrontation was just beginning. And both men were hiding secrets that would turn this morning into something nobody in Riverside would ever forget. If you're enjoying this story of justice and standing up for what's right, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will restore your faith that bullies always face consequences. Tyler's hand shot toward his phone, but Jake was faster. Not threatening, just deliberate, stepping between Tyler and Marcus with the practiced awareness of someone who'd learned to read violence before it happened. "Back off, convict," Tyler spat, his voice cracking slightly. "You're making a huge mistake." Jake remained motionless. "The only mistake I see is a grown man bullying someone's grandfather." The diner's atmosphere shifted. Phones were recording now. At least 6 customers had their cameras pointed at the confrontation. Sarah Chen adjusted her angle to capture Tyler's face clearly. This time, there would be evidence. Tyler's confidence returned when he noticed the cameras. He was used to performing. "You people always stick together, don't you? Losers defending losers." He turned to address the room. "This ex-con probably robbed someone to end up in prison. And you're all going to take his side." Marcus Webb spoke up, his voice stronger than before. "Son, you don't know anything about this man. Or me." "I know enough," Tyler shot back. "My father warned me about your type. Veterans who can't let go of the past, criminals who can't adjust to society." He smirked at Jake. "Bet your parole officer would love to hear about you starting fights in public." Jake's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. Tyler had just revealed something crucial. He knew exactly what buttons to push, exactly how to weaponize the system against people with records. "I'm not starting anything," Jake said calmly. "I'm asking you politely to apologize to Mr. Webb and leave him alone." Tyler laughed, pulling out his phone. "Or what? You'll assault me? Perfect. I'll have you back in prison before lunch." He held up his phone, already dialing. "Dad? Yeah, it's me. I need you to call Sheriff Morrison. Some ex-convict is threatening me at Riverside Diner." Jake's jaw clenched at the name. Sheriff Morrison. His uncle, the same man who'd testified against him 12 years ago, who'd made sure Jake got maximum sentencing, who'd told him at sentencing that he was a disgrace to the family name. Tyler noticed the reaction, and his smile widened. "Oh, this is perfect. You know the sheriff, don't you?" The diner went deathly quiet. Even the cook had stopped working to watch through the kitchen window. What Tyler didn't know was that Jake had spent his entire prison sentence studying law. Every book he could access, every legal precedent, every loophole and protection. He'd watched men with money manipulate the system while poor inmates rotted for lesser crimes. He'd sworn that if he ever got out, he'd never be powerless again. And he'd learned something crucial: everything changed when you had evidence. "Mr. Webb," Jake said without taking his eyes off Tyler, "did this man assault you?" Marcus touched his collar where Tyler had grabbed him. "He did." "Did he threaten you?" "He told me I didn't belong here. That I should leave." "Sarah," Jake called to the waitress, "you saw everything?" Sarah nodded, her phone still recording. Every word. Every action. Tyler's smirk faltered. "That's not, I barely touched him. This is ridiculous." Jake finally pulled out his own phone. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to Mr. Webb. You're going to pay for his breakfast and the mess you made. And then you're going to leave." "Or what?" Tyler challenged. "Or I send this video," Jake held up his phone, which had been recording audio the entire time, "to every news station, social media platform, and legal advocate I know. Along with witness statements from everyone here." Tyler's face went pale. "You can't. My father will bury you in lawsuits." "For documenting assault and harassment?" Jake's voice remained steady. "I spent 12 years learning exactly what I can and can't do. This is completely legal." Marcus Webb added quietly, "Son, I'm also president of the Veterans Coalition of Riverside County. We have 847 members and a legal fund specifically for cases involving veteran harassment." The color drained completely from Tyler's face. This wasn't going how he'd planned. Tyler's father, Robert Grant, arrived 15 minutes later in a Mercedes that cost more than most people's houses. He strode into the diner like he owned it, because legally, he owned the building. "Tyler, what's this about?" Robert's voice carried the authority of someone used to solving problems with money and influence. But when he saw the phone still recording, the crowd of witnesses, and his son's panicked expression, something shifted in his calculation. Jake recognized that look. It was the same expression prison guards got when they realized a situation had escaped their control. Robert Grant was a bully too, just better dressed, better connected, and far more dangerous than his son. "Mr. Grant," Jake said respectfully but firmly, "your son assaulted and harassed this veteran. Multiple witnesses recorded it. We're asking for an apology and compensation for damages." Robert's eyes narrowed, assessing Jake like a predator sizing up prey. "And you are?" "Jake Morrison." Recognition flickered across Robert's face. "Morrison. The sheriff's nephew. I remember your case." A cold smile. "Assault and battery, wasn't it? 12 years. My. Fresh out of prison and already inserting yourself into situations that don't concern you." The power dynamic shifted instantly. Robert Grant was reminding everyone in the room that Jake was an ex-convict, someone society had already judged and found wanting. But Jake had spent 12 years preparing for exactly this moment. "Mr. Grant, are you threatening a witness to your son's crime? Because that's obstruction of justice. Also recordable. Also prosecutable." Robert's smile didn't waver, but his eyes showed calculation. This ex-convict was smarter than expected. "Nobody's threatening anyone," Robert said smoothly. "I'm simply suggesting that filing false accusations against my son could have consequences. Legal ones, of course." Marcus Webb stood up slowly, leaning on his cane but standing with military bearing. "Mr. Grant, I'm also a retired federal prosecutor. I specialized in civil rights cases. Your son committed assault and battery against a protected class, elderly veterans. That's a federal crime, not a local matter." The revelation hit like a bomb. Tyler's face went white. "Dad, I didn't know." "Shut up," Robert snapped, his composure finally cracking. Jake watched the dynamic shift with satisfaction. This was what he'd learned in prison. Bullies only respected power, and sometimes the best power was simply knowing the law better than they did. But Robert Grant hadn't built an empire by backing down easily. His next words would show everyone exactly how dangerous wealthy men could be when cornered. Robert Grant's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Mr. Webb, prosecuting attorney or not, you're retired. And my legal team has buried bigger problems than a confused veteran misremembering a simple disagreement." The insult hung in the air like poison. Jake felt his fists clench involuntarily. 12 years of anger management classes, therapy sessions, and promises to stay clean, all threatened by watching this smug predator dismiss a war hero's intelligence. But Marcus Webb simply smiled. "Mr. Grant, I may be retired from prosecution, but I still maintain my bar license. And I still have connections at the Department of Justice." Robert's eyes flickered with annoyance, but he pressed forward. "Connections won't help when my son files a countersuit for defamation, emotional distress, and harassment. Tyler, let's go." "Actually," Jake said quietly, "there's something you should know." Robert turned, barely masking his contempt. "Unless you have a law degree hidden in that prison record, I'm not interested in what an ex-convict thinks." "I don't have a law degree," Jake admitted. "But I do have something else." He pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket, worn leather, pages filled with meticulous handwriting. "For the last 3 months since my release, I've been documenting everything. Your son's pattern of harassment isn't new." Tyler's face went pale. "You've been following me?" "No. I've been having breakfast here 3 times a week. You've been terrorizing people that entire time." Jake flipped through pages. "April 15th, you harassed a single mother about her kids being too loud. Threw food at their table. May 2nd, you threatened a college student for sitting in your booth. Made her cry. May 23rd, you assaulted a delivery driver for parking near your car." Robert's jaw tightened. "That's surveillance. Illegal." "It's observation in a public place," Marcus corrected calmly. "Completely legal. I should know, I taught criminal law at the State University for 15 years. Saracen stepped forward, her hands shaking but voice steady. "I have records too. 3 years of incident reports I filed with management. They were all ignored because Mr. Grant owns this building." Other customers began speaking up. "He threw coffee at me last month. an older woman said. Called my daughter a slur, another man added. Threatened to have my food truck license revoked, a young entrepreneur contributed. Robert Grant's expression shifted from confidence to calculation. This wasn't just one incident. This was a pattern that could destroy his carefully constructed reputation. This is extortion, Robert said coldly. No, Marcus replied, standing straighter despite his age. This is documentation. There's a difference. Jake watched Robert's mind work, calculating odds and consequences. This was the moment bullies always faced, when their actions finally accumulated enough weight that money and connections couldn't shield them anymore. But Robert Grant hadn't stayed powerful by being stupid. Everyone has a price, Robert said, reaching for his wallet. Name yours. All of you. We can settle this quietly right now. The offer created a moment of silence. For people struggling with rent, medical bills, student loans, Robert's money was real power. Jake saw several people waver. He understood completely. Prison had taught him that survival sometimes meant compromising principles. But something had changed during those 12 years inside. He'd watched men sell their dignity for cigarettes and protection. He'd seen guards look away from abuse because it was easier than standing up. He'd lived in a world where power always won. He'd promised himself that if he ever got out, he'd be different. Keep your money, Jake said firmly. Robert raised an eyebrow. Everyone says that until they see the amount. He pulled out a checkbook. $50,000. Split between you and Mr. Webb. All charges dropped, all evidence deleted. Marcus shook his head. I've seen men like you my entire career, Mr. Grant. You think everything's negotiable. Everything is, Robert replied coldly. You just haven't met your price yet. Tyler, meanwhile, had been texting frantically. Dad, we should just go. This isn't worth it. Shut up, Robert snapped. Then to the room, 100,000. Final offer. Or we leave here, and tomorrow my lawyers file harassment charges against every single one of you. And unlike your little amateur recordings, my legal team actually knows what they're doing. The threat was real. Jake had seen it happen in prison, wealthy defendants burying victims under endless motions, depositions, legal fees. The process itself became the punishment. Several customers looked at each other nervously. $100,000 versus years of legal hell. Jake's phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Keep him talking. Recording everything. Lieutenant Barnes, State Police. Jake's heart raced. Lieutenant Catherine Barnes, the one honest cop who'd believed Jake was innocent 12 years ago. The one who'd kept investigating after everyone else closed the case. The one who'd finally uncovered the truth 3 years into his sentence, leading to appeals that eventually secured his early release. She'd been watching the diner's live security feed. Jake needed to buy time. Mr. Grant, Jake said carefully, before we discuss money, can I ask you something? Robert checked his expensive watch impatiently. What? Do you know why I went to prison? Assault and battery. You beat someone senseless outside a bar. That's what the conviction said, Jake agreed. But do you know the real story? Tyler shifted uncomfortably. Robert's eyes narrowed. I don't care about your sob story. You should, Jake said quietly. Because the man I allegedly beat? His name was David Chun. He was harassing his ex-girlfriend outside that bar. Threatening her. I intervened. Sarah Chun gasped audibly. David Chun? That's my uncle. The connection hit everyone simultaneously. David had connections to local police, Jake continued. His statement said I attacked him unprovoked. The woman I was protecting mysteriously disappeared before trial. We later learned David's family paid her to leave the state. I had no witnesses, no evidence, just my word against a connected man's lies. Robert's expression remained cold, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of a familiar pattern. Sheriff Morrison was the arresting officer, Jake said. He testified that I had a history of violence, completely fabricated. He's your hunting buddy, isn't he, Mr. Grant? Robert's silence was confirmation enough. 12 years, Jake said, his voice steady despite the emotion underneath. 12 years for trying to stop someone from hurting a woman. 12 years watching men with money and connections get away with anything, while guys like me rotted for doing the right thing. Marcus Webb placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. Lieutenant Barnes finally uncovered the truth. David Chun had 3 previous assault complaints that were buried. The woman Jake protected came forward years later with her testimony. Jake's conviction was overturned, but he'd already served most of his sentence. The diner was completely silent now. So when you ask me to name my price, Jake said, looking directly at Robert Grant, understand that I've already paid it. 12 years of my life. My 20s. Career opportunities. Relationships. Everything, because I stood up to a bully. He stepped closer to Robert. I'm not making that mistake again. This time, the bully faces consequences. Robert's mask finally cracked. You self-righteous. Do you have any idea what I can do to you? Your parole can be revoked for any violation. 1 complaint to the parole board and you're back inside. That's witness intimidation, Marcus said calmly. Also a felony. Robert grabbed Tyler's arm. We're leaving. Sue all of them. Harassment, defamation, conspiracy, I don't care. Bury them. That's when the police cars pulled up outside. But these weren't local sheriff vehicles. These were unmarked state police sedans. Lieutenant Catherine Barnes walked through the door, badge clearly visible. Behind her, 2 other state investigators. Mr. Grant, Barnes said professionally, we need to discuss some irregularities in several assault complaints involving your son. Robert's face went from red to white in seconds. Tyler looked like he might vomit. And Jake Morrison finally allowed himself the smallest smile. The secret he'd been keeping wasn't just his notebook of observations. For 3 months, he'd been working with Lieutenant Barnes to build a case. Every incident he'd witnessed, every victim he'd quietly connected with state investigators, every pattern documented properly this time. This wasn't revenge. This was justice, done the right way. Barnes approached Marcus. Mr. Webb, I understand you were assaulted today. Would you like to press charges? Marcus looked at Tyler, young, scared, finally realizing actions had consequences. Yes, Lieutenant. I would. Robert Grant's empire of intimidation was about to face something money couldn't fix, actual law enforcement doing their job properly. Robert Grant's lawyer, Philip Hastings, arrived within 20 minutes. Expensive suit, briefcase that cost more than Jake's entire month of parole-approved housing, and the confidence of a man who'd never lost a case he couldn't afford to win. Lieutenant Barnes, Hastings said smoothly, extending his hand. I'm representing the Grant family. I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding without unnecessary drama. Barnes didn't shake his hand. This isn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Hastings. This is assault, witnessed by multiple parties, recorded on multiple devices. Alleged assault, Hastings corrected. And I have 6 witnesses who will testify that Mr. Webb initiated the confrontation. Jake's stomach dropped. 6 witnesses? Where would they? Then he saw them. 3 men and 3 women entering the diner, all well-dressed, all wearing expressions of rehearsed concern. Professional witnesses. People paid to lie under oath. This was how Robert Grant operated. Money didn't just buy lawyers, it bought entire narratives. Marcus Webb's face tightened, but his voice remained steady. Those people weren't even here during the incident. They were outside, Hastings said without missing a beat. They saw the entire situation through the windows before coming in to check on Mr. Tyler Grant, who they feared was being threatened by an aggressive ex-convict. The lie was so polished it almost sounded believable. Tyler found his courage again, protected by his father's legal shield. That's exactly what happened. This criminal grabbed me, threatened me. My father came to protect me. Sarah Chin stepped forward, phone in hand. I recorded everything. Your son is lying. Hastings smiled coldly. Recordings can be edited, manipulated. My digital forensics expert will demonstrate how easily footage can be altered to support false narratives. Jake felt the familiar weight of helplessness crushing down. This was exactly how his first case had gone. Truth versus money. Justice versus connections. And money always won. But Lieutenant Barnes wasn't backing down. Mr. Hastings, are you aware that this diner security system uploads directly to state servers? The footage is time-stamped, encrypted, and independently verified. Hastings's smile flickered slightly. That doesn't change witness testimony. It does when your witnesses committed perjury, Barnes replied calmly. She nodded to her investigators, who approached the 6 witnesses with badges clearly visible. We've been monitoring this situation for 3 months. Every time the Grant family faced accountability, these exact same 6 people appeared with convenient testimony. One of the fake witnesses, a woman in her 40s, went pale. I want a lawyer. Smart choice, Barnes said. Because conspiracy to obstruct justice carries serious prison time. Robert Grant's mask finally shattered. You've been investigating my family? On what grounds? On the grounds that your son has committed 17 documented assaults in the past 2 years, Barnes said, pulling out a tablet. All dismissed due to witness intimidation, manufactured alibis, and your financial influence over local law enforcement. She swiped through screens, each one showing incident reports, medical records, police statements. February 2023, Tyler Grant assaulted a waiter at Meridian Restaurant. Victim recanted after receiving an anonymous payment of $15,000. June 2023, Tyler Grant attacked a college student outside a bar. Case dismissed when the victim suddenly moved out of state. October 2023, Tyler Grant hospitalized a homeless man. No charges filed because Sheriff Morrison classified it as self-defense. Robert's face was stone. Speculation and circumstantial evidence. Not anymore, Barnes said. Because 3 weeks ago, one of those victims came forward. Jennifer Torres, the college student from June. She kept copies of the payment receipts, the threatening letters, the phone recordings of your people offering her money to disappear. Tyler's hands started shaking. Dad. Shut up, Robert hissed. But Barnes wasn't finished. Jennifer's testimony opened the door to reinvestigate all 17 cases. And when we started digging, we found something interesting. A pattern of payments from Grant Development LLC to a company called Riverside Security Solutions. That company doesn't provide security, it provides professional witnesses and evidence manipulation. Hastings tried to interrupt. Lieutenant, this is documented fraud, Barnes cut him off. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has been building a RICO case for 6 months. Today's incident just gave us probable cause to arrest Tyler Grant immediately instead of waiting for the full investigation to conclude. The word FBI hit Robert like a physical blow. Jake watched the man who'd seemed untouchable 30 minutes ago realize that his empire was crumbling. Not because of violence or revenge, but because patient, methodical police work had finally caught up with years of corruption. You can't arrest my son, Robert said, his voice losing its authority. He has rights. So did his 17 victims, Barnes replied. Tyler Grant, you're under arrest for assault and battery of Marcus Webb. Additional charges pending investigation. 2 state investigators moved toward Tyler, who looked desperately at his father. Dad, do something. For the first time, Robert Grant had no answer. His money, his connections, his carefully constructed system of protection, all useless against state-level investigators who'd done everything by the book. Tyler was handcuffed and read his rights. His expensive watch caught the light as his hands were secured behind his back. The same hands that had grabbed Marcus Webb's collar an hour ago. But the real devastation was just beginning. Barnes turned to Robert. Mr. Grant, we're also executing search warrants on Grant Development LLC, your personal residences, and all financial accounts associated with Riverside Security Solutions. Federal investigators are at your office right now. Robert's phone started buzzing, frantic calls from his company, his accountants, his other lawyers. The empire he'd built on intimidation and corruption was being dismantled in real time. Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in 12 years, vindication. Not revenge, but the simple satisfaction of watching justice actually work the way it was supposed to. Marcus Webb approached Tyler before they took him away. The young man who'd called him pathetic now looked small, scared, and utterly broken. Son, Marcus said quietly, I served in Vietnam. I watched 19-year-old boys face consequences for their actions every single day. Some learned from it. Some didn't. He paused. I hope you're one who learns. Tyler said nothing, tears streaming down his face as reality crashed over him. Robert tried one final play. "Lieutenant Barnes, surely we can discuss alternatives to arrest. Community service, rehabilitation programs, financial restitution. The same alternatives you denied 17 other victims?" Barnes asked coldly. "No, Mr. Grant. Your son is facing prosecution. And depending on what we find in those financial records, you might be joining him." The color drained from Robert's face completely. Sarah Chun stepped forward, her voice stronger than before. "Lieutenant, I have 3 years of documented complaints about Tyler's behavior that management ignored. I also have recordings of conversations where building management told me to stay quiet or lose my job." Other customers added their voices, a chorus of people who'd been silenced for too long, now finding courage in numbers. Barnes took notes on each statement. "We'll need formal depositions from all of you. This case is going to be thorough." Jake watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. This was what justice looked like when it actually worked. Not vigilante revenge, not violence, but systematic accountability through proper channels. As Tyler was led out in handcuffs, passing cameras from news crews who'd gotten wind of the arrest, his life of consequence-free cruelty ended permanently. Robert Grant stood alone in the diner, his phone still buzzing with disaster after disaster. His lawyer was already calculating damage control, but both men knew the truth. This wasn't something money could fix. "Mr. Morrison," Barnes said, approaching Jake. "Thank you for your cooperation these past months. Your documentation was crucial." Jake nodded, still processing that this had actually worked. "I just wanted to do it right this time." "You did," Barnes assured him. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry it took 12 years to clear your name." Marcus Webb shook Jake's hand firmly. "You stood up when nobody else would. That takes courage most people don't have." The elderly veteran's respect meant more to Jake than any legal victory. This was why he'd gotten involved, not for revenge against the Grants, but to be the person he wished had existed 12 years ago when he needed someone to stand up for truth. As state investigators collected evidence and interviewed witnesses, the news spread beyond Riverside. Social media exploded with footage of Tyler's arrest. The hashtag Grant Accountability started trending. Victims from other incidents began coming forward, empowered by seeing justice actually prevail. Robert Grant's final words before leaving with his lawyer were quiet but venomous. "This isn't over." But everyone in that diner knew the truth. It absolutely was over. The system had finally worked the way it was supposed to, and no amount of money or influence could undo what had been set in motion. Jake Morrison sat back down at his corner booth, his coffee cold but his conscience clear. For the first time in 12 years, he felt like justice might actually exist after all. 6 months later, Riverside Diner looked exactly the same worn linoleum, same smell of coffee and bacon, same corner booth where everything had changed. But everything was different. Jake Morrison sat in his usual spot, reading the newspaper. The headline made him smile. "Grant Development Files for Bankruptcy. Former CEO faces federal charges." The investigation had uncovered everything. 17 cases of witness tampering, financial fraud spanning 8 years, systematic bribery of local officials. Robert Grant was facing 30 years in federal prison. His empire, built on intimidation and corruption, had collapsed completely. Tyler Grant had taken a plea deal. 5 years in prison, mandatory counseling, permanent restraining orders from all previous victims. His sentence would be served in the same facility where Jake had spent 12 years. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Sarah Chun approached with fresh coffee, but she wasn't wearing a waitress uniform anymore. She wore business casual, manager attire. After the incident went viral, corporate had investigated and fired the previous management team for covering up complaints. Sarah had been promoted, given a raise, and full authority to ban problematic customers permanently. "Morning, Jake." "The usual." "Please." "And Sarah, still surreal seeing you run this place." She smiled. Still surreal having a boss who actually cares about employee safety. She glanced at the newspaper. Saw the Grant verdict. "How does it feel?" Jake considered the question carefully. "Honestly, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like something that should have happened 12 years ago finally caught up." Marcus Webb entered the diner, moving easier now without the stress of harassment. He'd become a regular again, often joining Jake for breakfast. The two men had formed an unexpected friendship, a 74-year-old veteran and a 42-year-old ex-convict bonded by standing up when others stayed silent. "Counselor," Jake greeted him with a smile. Marcus slid into the booth. "I told you to stop calling me that. I'm retired." "You came out of retirement to testify in 4 of Tyler's victim cases. That's not retired, that's dedicated." Marcus chuckled. Those people deserved real legal representation, not whatever public defender gets assigned randomly. He paused. "Speaking of which, your expungement hearing is next week." Nervous. Jake's conviction had been overturned, but the record still existed. Lieutenant Barnes had personally recommended full expungement, erasing it completely. After 6 months of paperwork and hearings, the final decision was days away. "Terrified," Jake admitted. 12 years of my life reduced to legal paperwork." "Not reduced," Marcus corrected gently. "Acknowledged. There's a difference." The door opened and Lieutenant Barnes walked in, out of uniform. She'd requested this meeting specifically. "Gentlemen," she greeted them, sliding into the booth. "I have news." Jake's heart raced. The expungement hearing wasn't until next week. Why would she? "The judge reviewed your case yesterday," Barnes said, her expression neutral. "He signed the expungement order this morning. Your record is officially cleared." The words took a moment to register. Cleared. After 12 years of being labeled a criminal, of job applications rejected before interviews, of people crossing the street when they saw him coming, it was gone. Jake felt his throat tighten. "I don't, thank you. Thank you for never giving up." Barnes shook her head. "I didn't do anything special. I just did my job the way it should have been done from the beginning." She paused. "But I do have something else." She pulled out an envelope. "The state has a new program, community liaison officers who work with recently released individuals to help them reintegrate. It's funded, it's official, and it needs people who understand both sides of the system." Jake opened the envelope. A job offer. Benefits, salary, purpose. "You stood up when it mattered," Barnes said. "Now help others do the same." The opportunity felt surreal. From prisoner to advocate. From powerless to someone who could actually change the system that had failed him. Marcus raised his coffee cup. To second chances done right. They toasted with coffee cups in a diner that had witnessed both injustice and accountability. Across town, Tyler Grant sat in county jail awaiting transfer to federal prison. His cell was small, cold, and nothing like the life of privilege he'd known. But he had something his father never gave him: time to actually face consequences and maybe, eventually, become someone different. Robert Grant, meanwhile, had lost everything. His company, his reputation, his freedom. Federal prosecutors had been merciless, and his own lawyers had abandoned him when the evidence became overwhelming. He'd built an empire on cruelty and discovered that empires built on corruption always crumble. Back at the diner, Sarah brought over breakfast, on the house, as always for Jake and Marcus. "You know," Jake said thoughtfully, 12 years ago, "if someone told me I'd be sitting here having breakfast with a veteran and a police lieutenant, celebrating a job helping people, I would have laughed." "Why?" Marcus asked. "Because I thought the system was permanently broken. That justice was just a word we told ourselves to feel better about unfairness." Barnes leaned forward. "And now? Now I know it's not automatic. Justice requires people willing to stand up even when it's difficult. It requires documentation, patience, proper channels." He paused. "It requires doing things the right way, even when the wrong way seems easier." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's wisdom earned through suffering. Don't waste it." Jake had no intention of wasting anything anymore. Every day out of prison was a gift. Every opportunity to help someone else navigate the system was a chance to be the person he'd needed 12 years ago. The diner filled with the morning breakfast crowd, regular people living regular lives, unaware that the booth in the corner held 3 people who'd proven that ordinary citizens could stand against corruption and win. As Jake left the diner that morning, walking into sunshine as a free man with a cleared record and a purpose, he realized something profound. Revenge would have felt good for a moment, but justice, real, documented, systematic justice, felt good forever. He pulled out his phone and texted the other victims who'd come forward during the investigation. Expungement approved. Job offer accepted. Coffee next week to discuss forming a support network. The responses came quickly. Yes. Count me in. Finally. A community of people who'd been silenced was finding their voice, one step at a time. Tyler Grant had mocked a veteran, not knowing an ex-convict would step in. But the real lesson wasn't about Jake's intervention, it was about what happened next. Building evidence instead of throwing punches. Using systems properly instead of taking shortcuts. Standing up not once, but persistently, methodically, until justice actually worked. Bullies like Tyler counted on people staying silent, on victims being too scared or tired to fight properly. They counted on money and connections being enough to escape accountability. But they forgot one crucial thing: patient, documented, systematic resistance always wins eventually. Because truth doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be persistent. Jake Morrison had learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Now he'd spend the rest of his life teaching it to others. If this story inspired you to believe that justice is still possible when good people refuse to stay silent, subscribe to the channel, because real change happens when ordinary people decide that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming the person who helps others avoid your mistakes, who stands up when others sit down, who proves that dignity and justice aren't just words, they're choices we make every single day.